Just, okay. What I hope is going to be a discussion and a kind of a virtual conversation about allyship. And kind of the guiding areas, the guiding questions for this conversation today. We're going to look at this concept of what is an ally, right? What do we mean? We're going to break apart. We're going to unpack that a little bit. We're then going to talk about, for ourselves, are there some things we can do to develop our allyship? And then perhaps we're also going to give a little critique of this concept, or perhaps the manifestation of allyship. And then hopefully we will have a wonderful discussion from you about what are your takeaways, right? So what have we learned together in this space today? Okay, and that is me. I thought it was important to share with you that kind of who I am as I come into this discussion of what an ally is, okay? So in terms of my identities, I would describe myself as white, of European descent. I'm cisgender, heterosexual, middle class background, and a native speaker of English. There are many other parts of me, right? And many other parts of my identity, but I thought for our discussion today, it might help you to know about those as we start kind of unpacking an ally, what it means to be an ally. Interestingly, I guess I should also share with you then, I consider myself a developing, right? Because I think this is a process that you always need to be getting better at, and always being engaging in reflection on what it means and what you need to be doing. But I consider myself a very strong ally of the Latinx community. I am perhaps a burgeoning, I'm learning a little bit more of how to be a strong ally to the LGBTQ plus community as well. There are other communities that I could be an ally to, but those are the two that for some reason have captured me, right? And that's what that's an element of being an ally that's kind of interesting, I think. Who you. So if you wouldn't mind, I know Dr. Santos-Dietz mentioned that we'll be talking at the end, but I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit now. If you would be so kind to, let's just look at the first question first. So for you, when you came into this session, how would you, for you in your terms, what do you think an ally is? Right? Like what comes to mind for you? I'll give you a few minutes. And once you've written your answer, if you want to then continue to look at what other people have written. So what do you think an ally is? Oh, love it. Ally is a verb, not a noun. Love that. Interesting. Oh, I hope you are able, as you're writing in your comments, I hope then you have enough time to be looking at some of the other comments in the box. They're phenomenal. Okay. Oh, can't see the comments in the box. I will read them, Emily. I would, as an old school teacher, I would love to do that. So, and this will help us kind of gather our thoughts too. So some of you have offered these wonderful comments, and one of them is, so ally or to ally, right? We love English for that reason, right? Ally pronunciation is different as a noun or verb, but to ally is a verb. Big exclamation point, in my opinion, not a noun. We also have someone saying allies are not self-designated, right? So, and I find that fascinating. Emily, allies are not self-designated. You are given the title after you've shown your contributions and intentions. we don't have a high five button on here, but wonderful comments. Someone who supports unconditionally and looks out for your interests. Someone who supports, we have a lot of support. Someone who supports and advocates for you. Oh, Sandra, that's a great one. Simple, a commitment, right? I like that. It's very, very direct and very, a commitment, again, more support. I won't call out people's names of who wrote things, but there's one really great comment that I have to agree with. And this, we're going to talk a little bit about this. And the comment is, I honestly get a little prickly when I hear people call themselves an ally, because it shouldn't have to be named. Okay. And also I won't add, we'll continue the discussion, but for that comment, I would also add, there's something about the need to name yourself that doesn't, it feels funny to me. It feels like a performance, but we'll get to that topic. Okay, a few more comments and then we'll keep going on. Support, read that. Ooh, 7 new messages, hold on. Amplify, ooh. So an ally, remember our topic is allyship, or being an ally means amplifying statements from others. Interesting. Helps provide voice when others don't have that privilege. And I believe that's our last comment. We will come back to this, everyone. So let's start with some of those wonderfully insightful comments. So kind of unpacking it a little bit in our brains, right? And in our mind as we move forward. Uh-oh, come on. I'm talking to my computer as we do. Come on. There we go. Okay. Here's a definition, right, from the literature. Let's add it to what we have already said. That is some words and some terms and some understanding that that are very similar to what we put forward. So we're going to, in general, from the literature, we look at terms like dominant group, right? When we talk about allyship or being an ally. And it is assumed that an ally is someone who is not necessarily a member of a group that he or she is being an ally to or for or with, okay? So there is an otherness to this concept that is interesting. It might go back to our statement about being prickly, right? Like when you have to say it, okay. So a member from a dominant group, not a member of the group being advocated for, is someone who seeks to end oppression by in some way improving the lives of marginalized individuals through intentional and conscious efforts. I would ask you to pay kind of close attention to that word efforts, because it assumes action. And we'll continue talking about that in a second. Okay. One of you in your definitions had also described privilege. I think, so using one's own privilege for the benefit of the group that you are an ally to or with or for. Okay. And that's what Bishop's second part of his definition comes to. And that is how allies are individuals who then transfer their own privilege, right? In order, they use it, they enact it to support those who do not have access to that privilege. So just to state something that is probably totally obvious to all of you. So there is an element of critical theory here, right? When we look at these definitions and we put them together. So, wow, come on. There we go. My computer's acting awfully slowly. Maybe it's the tornado. Okay. So going back to some of what you said in your descriptions, your wonderful descriptions, thinking a little bit about what I just presented to you about otherness and group. Okay. So if you would be so kind, let's go back to that chat box and answer this question. So what do we know about who allies are? Okay, let's talk specifically about who they are. Okay, and then what do we know about what they do? What do you think an ally does? What do you think, who do you think an ally is? Okay, if you don't mind, go back to that chat box. And I will read the comments aloud too. Actually, I'm going to start taking notes. I'm going to go old school since I don't have my 3 monitors in front of me, as I would love to have. You take some notes from what you say, if you don't mind. Now, am I missing something? I do not see many comments, folks. So who, I'm going to divide them into 2 comments. So who people are, anyone can be an ally. Allies are willing to do everything. Oh yeah, so sorry. Here I am reading them for my own enjoyment. Let me read them aloud to you too, since you said you don't necessarily have, some of you don't have access to the comments. So in descriptions of, I'm assuming this is answer to the question of who they are. Interesting, someone just said white people. And perhaps, so I would suggest now to broaden that definition a little bit, or that description, that characteristic. We say white people, it's a great answer. Particularly when we're looking at different racialized groups, right? But also keep in mind that there are many different aspects of cultural identities that may not be associated with race. So white people is definitely, in terms of racial and ethnic identities, that's a great description for possible allies. Anyone can be an ally. Allies are willing to do everything it takes. Kind of like that. That's a big word. You're making me scared, guys. That's like a big order, right? Anything it takes. Can't wait to continue on with that. Okay. Wait, maybe I didn't finish reading that. Anyone, there we go. Sorry, Moeli. Anyone can be an ally, but it is one who uses actions like, for example, advocacy, speaking up and against injustices. Okay, so again, that word actions is coming up, very important. And perhaps last but not least, allies are observant. Lost it again. There we go. Allies are observant. Where'd you go? There we go. Observant, confident. That's an interesting word. Loud. I like that one. I am a loud person in general, so I kind of like that term. But also know where to draw the line on their work so they don't, high five, so they don't overstep and speak for marginalized folks. Again, high five. And to me, allies are constantly learning and learning about themselves, about other groups, about systems of inequity, and about paths of resistance. Allies don't place additional burdens in the, great addition. Allies don't place additional burdens in the forms of entitlement to information or education on marginalized folks. Great. Okay, and we're getting towards the end. People who have dominant identities that intervene on behalf of those with marginalized identities. So, for example, cis for trans, great example. Heteros for the LGBTQA+ community, wonderful examples. Okay, and I think we'll finish up with our chat window discussion of with one of the final issue, one who uses their privilege to advocate for those without the same privilege. Okay? So everyone, you've already got it, right? Everything you have said is what is discussed in the literature. So let's just sum it up, as we love to do, with going to the literature. Okay. And one thing that's also, I think, very interesting. I teach in a college of education. I'm an educator. And so when I look to references and resources, I generally look towards educational resources. The best knowledge that is being created about allyship does not necessarily come from education. It should, it could, it probably, let's hope it can in the future, really comes to sociology, psychology, and talking about identity development. So it's very firmly in the area of identity and identity development. So that's why I've mentioned this. I've included this kind of summary of what we've been discussing so far. So it does. So when we say, if we say, I'm an ally of fulano, right, or tal group, right, or if we think of someone as an ally, right, if we kind of put them in that, it's a grouping, it's an expression of identity, isn't it? Okay. In terms of expressing aspects of our identity, there's that element of how does one express it, right? How do we also, how is it performed? Okay? And just to kind of stop and reflect on that for a moment, I'd ask all of you to just kind of think about that. So in terms of identity in general, right? All of our different aspects of our identity, how do we perform it, right? How do we demonstrate it for it? You know, how is it known? For example, very often, when you saw me, when you were clicking in, you looked at me, you saw my name, and you probably quickly identified me as a member of certain groups, right? Based on my name, based on my face, based now on the way I'm speaking to you. If we were in a room together, you might also see, now you would see that I am married, right? Got the ring on, etc. You would see certain parts of me, but until I kind of said, oh, my husband, da 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 da, you wouldn't know, luckily these days. But in the past, you would have known. If I had explained that I was married, you would have known that I was heterosexual, right? Because there weren't opportunities to mention that. So anyway, there are aspects of who we are that we see, right? We make assumptions when we meet people. Some are also not visible, right? So the question for allies, right, or the question we should ask of our allies as well is, how is it being expressed, right? How is it being performed? And one of the many critiques of allyship is, why are you performing it in this way, right? Is that legit? Is it for social status? Is it for, you know, what's the real kind of, what's in el fondo, right? Like why are you really doing that? Okay. So that's it. Any questions or comments before we move on? But that's a nice general summary of what all of your comments really discussed. Okay. The other thing that did come up in most of your comments as well, and if not, if you hadn't thought of it, right? One of Bork is one of the has written quite a lot on critiquing, right? Like this, I don't want to take those words, but one of the major critiques of allyship and saying, okay, so why are you doing it? Who are you doing it? Because it's not about wearing a t-shirt, right? That's the critique. It's about action. There is, his particular critique is quite strong in that it's very easy to sit back and like to click something on Facebook and be like, right? Whereas true allyship is about doing, right? So it is an identity, but it is about being, and it is not about being in a static position. And here we go, okay. I'm going to give you a second just to read that critique, kind of soak it in. And pay particular attention to that last part of the sentence, the last sentence, but the last part of that sentence. Okay. And that relates to, right? So again, back to, I wear the t-shirt, I click on Facebook, okay? But am I still, am I acting or not acting in ways that perpetuate the system of oppression that you are proclaiming to want to change and to help those group members overcome? Okay. And so right now, if you look into this area, that is a very strong and very good and powerful critique of what allyships are. Okay. So one more time. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about power and privilege. Some of you have mentioned it in your in the chat box. Okay. But if you wouldn't mind sharing with everyone. So what is, why are we talking about power and privilege? Like, kind of what roles do those play, right? And if you can go so far as to then say, how is that problematic, right? How can that sometimes be problematic for being an ally and enacting in those ways? And so let's just start with that one, if you don't mind. So let's talk, think about a little bit about power and privilege and how those can be problematic in being a good ally. Now I'm not, oh, here we go. No. This is really interesting. We must, because of the tornado, we must have a little bit of a delay with our internet here. So have a great comment to start the ball rolling. And in thinking about power and privilege, right, and allyship or enacting, performing the identity of being an ally, says it assumes that others are, so they're problematic, right? Does it mean that we're assuming, we being, so I'm from the dominant group, I'm the ally, am I assuming that others are incapable of representing and helping themselves? Great point. Thank you for sharing that. Some other thoughts on power and privilege. Oh, this is a wonderful comment. Wonderful comment. So another comment in relation to that power and privilege and the problematic, what can be problematic about it is I see a lot of, the quote, I see a lot of white colleagues in supervisory positions try to educate others on certain racial groups / cultural practices, but end up perpetuating stereotypes towards those racial groups and their cultural practices. Sadly, I have also been in those same positions, right? And I have seen the same thing. In the literature, sometimes we'll talk about like the white savior, right? Yeah. Okay. I have to, oh, here we go. An ally might get rejected from position of influence or power. So I'm not, I would love to hear a little bit more of that, if we could. So an ally, let me repeat that, see if you guys have any. An ally might get rejected from position of influence or power. So Jen, are you saying, so for example, by my acting as an ally to a certain group, I then put my own authority, power position in jeopardy? Not have a voice that is heard. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, it's very, very interesting. Okay. Just a few, any more final thoughts on that, the question of power and privilege? So, and I'm trying to keep it on, in order to have progress for marginalized folk, we need to listen to those folks, not their privileged allies. Again, we need a new, so I'm going to suggest to Zoom that we just have the high five, not just the hands up, the thumbs up. We need a high five. Because that's a very, so, oh, okay, I wonder, and here's a good comment. I wonder, so back to the comment that I didn't, I wanted to understand a little bit better. And I wonder if Jen is saying that allies don't always get to have a prominent place at the table. Oh, that's great. Yes, oh, that's interesting. So if you don't mind, and any other thoughts? Any other thoughts, comments? Okay. Before we go on, a lot of what you're saying, I also just wanted to reflect a little bit and share with you my experience as, so it's really interesting. I do not claim the identity of an ally, right? But I do, and we have another term that we're going to use that we're going to close our session with, and Dr. Santos Dietz had used it earlier. So we'll come back to that, co-conspirator being the great term. But my experience has been very similar to that. So number one, it is, right? So I always, I have engaged in this as a lifelong process. It's not like, oh, I take this professional development at work, click, now I'm an ally, I'm all good now, got it, right? So it's a lifelong process of assessing my own positionality, looking around for, in reference to various groups, right? And various groups of which I am not a member. So definitely using self-awareness. And here's another interesting one that I'm going to throw out to you. It is reflected in the literature too, but it 100% has been my experience. So I almost feel a little bit of shame as I admit it to you, but I'm gonna. And that is when you experience being a part, when you are in whatever identity that we're talking about, when you are a member of the dominant group, you're used to being at the table, right? You're used to maybe even setting that table and creating the meal and then running the agenda for that meeting, okay? For me, a very important part of being an ally has been stepping back and listening. And I think one of you had mentioned that too. And again, reflected in the literature, stepping back and listening to the community that you are being supportive of, right? Right. So let me just end that there. That for me has been one of the, I won't say one of the biggest challenges, but it's probably one of the most important actions that I take without listening, without realizing that I am not controlling this, right? But I am hopefully helping in whatever way someone tells me I can help. Yeah, so you don't always have to be in charge. That's what it comes down for me. It's one of my mantras. But any thoughts on that before we continue on? Okay, wonderful. Oh, again, please tell me if my chat window is not catching up because of our, because of the internet and the tornado. I love saying that. So moving forward, okay. Here are just, I would love to say that these are my ideas. They're not. So again, taken from the literature, and Bork, who has done some wonderful critiquing of this term allyship and being an ally. So to sum up what the literature says is kind of important here. So you must be aware of your privilege, right? So that's the constant, right? Always looking at your own privilege. Be prepared to be uncomfortable. And that's the one thing I think we can all agree. When we look at the wider kind of political scene, that's what I notice. Most people, then as soon as they start feeling that discomfort of, ooh, yeah, I'm complicit. Ooh, yeah, I have privilege. Instead of accepting it, owning it, and kind of delving in that, there's a little bit of, yeah, but I didn't do that, right? But I wouldn't do that. I don't believe that, et cetera. And we all know the manifestations of how that getting rid of the discomfort, instead of living in it, letting it seep into our bones, and then realizing that we get to we can take off our ally identity, right? Whereas members of the group that we are supposedly advocating and working towards do not have that freedom, nor would, anyway, we can go on for hours about that. But yeah, so that discomfort level, to very, yeah, it's a hard one. So when you are helping people become allies, please remember that discomfort, and maybe we can share some ideas of how to work them through that and make them stay in there a little bit. This is an interesting one about be quote unquote in the community. Okay? And that goes back to how Dr. Santos Dietz and I kind of how we operated when we were able to work together. Okay, and that is just be in there, go in. Okay, don't expect to be the center of that community. Don't expect to be going in as like, look at me, I'm helping you. Thank you very much. Right? Be in and listen and be a part of the community, and also know you are not necessarily. You are not of that community, but if you are invited in, be a good guest, maybe is a good way to say it. Okay, be comfortable with the fact that that is not you, and who you are, but you're an invited guest to that table. So the other thing, and I love how we're finishing the what to do moving forward section with ally with other allies for one very important reason. Okay, hold yourselves accountable. Okay, don't expect members of the group to be schooling you on things, to be teaching you about things, and hold each other accountable. Okay, and when we see things going on, okay, speak up. That term accountability just strikes me as incredibly important. Okay, again, because this is not a blink, I'm done, finish line. This is a lifelong process. Okay,